Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 1 to 10. Lynn felt like he was splitting apart. He could still feel his main consciousness, but besides that, Lynn discovered that his spirit seemed to have extended, simultaneously controlling another body in a different time and space. That body of his was sitting on top of a huge monster's corpse, and the scene was very surreal. Am I dreaming? Lynn blinked his eyes. He found that his main consciousness was lying in a cold pit, with the sound of sparse rain mixed with the clang, clang, clang sound of what seemed like a shovel digging soil. The rain mixed with the dirt on his face, bringing a sticky and disgusting feeling. Lynn looked up in confusion, only to see a blood-red crescent moon hanging in the sky. Although most of the moon was covered by dark clouds, he could still see a few edges. The moon, why is it red? Where is he? His hazy consciousness finally fully awakened at this moment. Lynn suddenly realized that his spirit had indeed split into two, simultaneously controlling two bodies, and his main consciousness body was being buried. Damn it! What kind of murder and burial scene is this? Lynn was startled. His first reaction was not that he had transmigrated, but that Conan's Reaper's aura had finally affected him, an innocent childhood friend. But then Lynn realized this was impossible. Rather than simply being affected by the Reaper's aura, this seemed more like he had transmigrated again, and into two people at the same time. Damn it! The brewery I just destroyed yesterday, all for nothing. Lynn felt his vision go black, and he started cursing in his mind. Just then, he felt a gust of wind coming towards his face. Lynn instinctively supported himself with his elbow and, with a skillful twist and roll, dodged the shovel that was coming down on his head and saw his attacker clearly. It was a tall, thin man who didn't look very strong, dressed in a retro-style high-collared coat. His hair was graying at the temples, and he looked to be around 40, staring at him with a mix of shock and terror. Is this the murderer this time? No need to choose from three. Wait, no. Lynn suppressed his wandering thoughts, quickly and deftly got up from the ground, and noticed that he was in a desolate forest, seemingly a perfect place for murder and body disposal. Ads by PubFuture. The tall, thin man dropped the shovel and seemed to be reaching for something in his coat. Lynn was familiar with this move. He immediately lunged forward, elbowing the man in the abdomen and snatching the half-drawn gun from his hand. He then kicked the man, sending him flying 3 or 4 meters before he crashed into a tree with a bang. The man's body slid down the tree and lay limp on the ground, unmoving. Lynn wasn't surprised. He skillfully checked to see if the man was pretending to be unconscious. After confirming that the man was indeed out cold, Lynn raised his hand, planning to strike the back of his neck again, but hesitated. Wait, this isn't the Conan world. If I hit him like this, will I kill him? Lynn pondered. Although he didn't have a no-kill principle, killing someone just after transmigrating, and possibly failing to dispose of the body properly, could lead to jail time if discovered by a detective. He wasn't sure about the self-defense laws in this world. After hesitating for a second, Lynn decided to use a safer method. He improvised a rope from the man's clothes and tied him up. After resolving the immediate crisis, Lynn's gaze fell on the gun he had taken from the man. It was clearly a revolver, but an old-fashioned one. This design, Victorian era. Damn. Lynn fiddled with the gun and within a few seconds, he had disassembled it into parts. As he examined the parts, he also focused part of his attention on the other body he was now controlling. Though he didn't understand how it happened, it was clear he now had a doppelganger, or a Smurf account. With Lynn's mindset, it was difficult but not impossible to control two bodies simultaneously. So his consciousness immediately spread to the Smurf account. On the monster's corpse, the originally empty eyes of a child about 7 or 8 years old gained a bit of liveliness, which was quickly covered by indifference and madness. Lynn looked down and saw a tear in his foot, surrounded by blood and black-red flesh chunks, some still wriggling and growing twisted tentacles. Honestly, it was a scene that could drive any intelligent being insane, terrifying and grotesque. But strangely, Lynn didn't feel any discomfort, as if it was nothing to him and couldn't shake him at all. Lynn could even calmly analyze the situation, concluding that he had crawled out of the monster's stomach. This was his mother. Ads by PubFuture. But this monster didn't die because of him, as Lynn could see the wounds on its body that he definitely couldn't have inflicted. The mother had died before he broke out of the stomach. Moreover, Lynn could see another bulge in the monster's stomach, indicating another creature inside. What could it be? Lynn thought, his gaze indifferent. Suddenly, he heard muffled crying, seemingly coming from under the bulging stomach. So, it's a child. Lynn looked at the bulge, hearing the crying getting weaker, but had no intention of rescuing the other. Even though the other seemed close to death. No, wait, what am I doing? Why am I just watching? Lynn blinked, his consciousness suddenly clear, suppressing the indifference and madness that seemed to coexist with the body. Lynn frowned, not bothering to figure out the situation, and directly lunged towards the bulge, tearing at the existing wound. Only then did he realize his current body was very small, looking like a 7 or 8-year-old child. But it seemed very strong. Just as Lynn managed to tear the wound open a bit to check on the child's condition, a flame suddenly burst from the tear. Lynn was startled, instinctively stepping back, and saw the flame cut the tear open like a blade. A child, larger than a typical baby, crawled out. The child, after crawling out, scanned the surroundings with lively red eyes before finally fixing on Lynn with a thoughtful expression. Then, Lynn watched in shock as the child's form turned into a flame, which quickly rose and condensed into a 7 or 8-year-old child. This child looked like a normal human, with blood-red hair and eyes to match. Though still young, it was clear he had good features and would be handsome when older. But his expression was very arrogant, making it clear he was a troublemaker. TN. Comment if you find any contradicting and hard to understand sentences, I'll fix it. And thanks for reading this novel in advance. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Who the hell is this? Lynn couldn't find words to describe what he was seeing, as everything in front of him defied his worldview. Even though he had mentally prepared himself upon seeing the monster's corpse, Lynn was still deeply shocked. It was at this moment, perhaps due to a delay or triggered by some keyword, that shattered memories and vast amounts of information flooded Lynn's mind, causing unbearable pain. With the influx of this information, Lynn finally understood what was going on. He had indeed crossed over again, and he had gained the ability to project avatars into different timelines. Currently, he was inhabiting his secondary avatar, lying atop the monster's corpse. The avatars seemed to be randomly generated, but each one had a complete background. Moreover, as long as Lynn had avatars alive, even if his primary avatar died, he could transfer his consciousness to a surviving secondary avatar, turning it into his new primary avatar. However, this came at a great cost, so it was best not to switch primary avatars unless absolutely necessary. Lynn's current primary avatar was named Lynn Sotos, a somewhat famous detective in the Lowen Kingdom's Backland region. But this was just the surface identity. Lynn Sotos was actually a Sequence 9 mystery prior, possessing Beyonder powers, a member of the secretive organization known as the Moses Ascetic Order, and also an informant for the Evernight Church's Nighthawk Squad. Lynn found himself in this situation because he accidentally discovered that his colleague, Zeril Victor Lee, was suspected of being a spy from the Fasak Empire. To confirm this, Lynn conducted a thorough investigation, only to later discover that Zeril Victor Lee seemed to know clues about the Tirani von Helmasuen's manuscript. Out of curiosity, Lynn chose not to immediately report this to the Evernight Church or the Moses Ascetic Order but instead decided to investigate further on his own. Then, Lynn was discovered by members of the Bakarland party who were also monitoring Detective Zeril. They ruthlessly silenced him. Ads by PubFuture. Lynn, is it you, ambassador of £5? A little bit of sarcasm, but I don't know how to be sarcastic. Lynn had read Lordofthemysteries. Before crossing over to the Conan world, Lynn had never left the underground base where he was raised. He didn't know whether to call it a laboratory, a shelter, or a cage. A lot of scientists raised, taught, and protected him there. Although Lynn never left the base, he was allowed to use the internet, which helped him learn about the outside world through books, novels, anime, and movies. Later, Lynn crossed over and became a classmate of Kudo Shinichi. After the washing machine incident, he turned into Conan, went to high school many times, experienced thousands of murder cases, infiltrated a distillery, learned new skills, and stole money. He helped the Red Side destroy the Black organization. Despite all this, his perfect memory still vividly recalled Lordofthemysteries. Lynn knew exactly how dangerous and crazy this world was. But even though the Conan world doesn't have mysterious powers, except for kids' tricks, it's still not safe for ordinary people. Lynn commented sarcastically. As someone who knew the washing machine well, he felt he had the right to speak on this matter. During his high school years, Lynn witnessed many bizarre deaths and often felt he might become one of Conan's cases. Maybe I've already become a case. Otherwise, why would I leave the Conan world? Lynn muttered, deciding to stop dwelling on this sad thought and focus on his current situation. Although his primary experience was worth mocking, as long as he didn't seek out trouble, Lynn's current situation was relatively safe. At worst, he could seek refuge with the Evernight Church or flee Beckland overnight. But the situation with Avatar, Smurf Account No. 1 was more complicated. Whether it was fortunate or unfortunate, Lynn's first avatar was born as an angel and became a sage on Sequence 2 of the Mystery Prior Pathway. As a result, Avatar No. 1 naturally had divinity. Lynn had just been affected by the backlash of having divinity, and although he broke free afterward, it didn't mean he could ignore its influence. Ads by PubFuture. In the short term, Lynn was indeed able to resist the divinity inherent in Avatar No. 1 for unknown reasons. However, if he remained in it for too long, Lynn would inevitably be assimilated and contaminated by the divinity it possessed. In addition, Lynn's main body could borrow the power of Avatar No. 1 to a certain extent, but this would lead to severe divine corruption. The more power Lynn borrowed, the greater the impact he would receive. If Lynn directly used the angel-level power borrowing for his main body, he would most likely go crazy. But that doesn't mean this avatar is useless, it just means I need a psychologist. Lynn muttered silently. As everyone knows, the spectator pathway is the best psychologist and can also alleviate the divinity and madness of others to a certain extent. In the original work, Klein had sought treatment from Miss Justice several times to stabilize his humanity and regulate his madness. And if Lynn could find a reliable psychologist to treat him, even if he couldn't solve the problem directly from the root, as long as he could heal the divine contamination Lynn encountered after controlling Avatar No. 1 each time and alleviate the aftereffects, Lynn would naturally be able to slowly allow Avatar No. 1 to establish his own beliefs, find other doctors, and thus restore his humanity and rid himself of madness. By then, Avatar No. 1 would be his true ace and external plug-in, rather than a time bomb. But the existence that could alleviate this degree of psychological problems. Lynn's mind was already calling out several names, but he forcefully stopped himself. No, I can't think about it. Direct thinking will definitely be sensed. I can only. Lynn's eyes flickered as he restrained his thoughts while simultaneously extending a portion of his consciousness to Avatar No. 1. The more you understand him, the more he understands you. This is the characteristic of high-level spectators. What Lynn was doing now was actually imitating Klein's method of dealing with 008. Klein used the Sephiroth to shield 008's perception. He thought about the plan involving 008 and Ince in the Saphira Castle. After being released from the Saphira Castle, he simply followed orders without thinking about the plan, thus deceiving 008. This also showed that the perception of other people's thoughts without any connections by high-level spectators was indeed restricted. Only thoughts explicitly related to them would be perceived. Although Lynn didn't have a Sephiroth, his secondary avatar was in another timeline, and while both avatars were under his control, their thoughts could to some extent be separated. This meant that Lynn could likely copy Klein's method. End of chapter. Although manipulating Avatar No. 1 would have side effects, for Lynn, it was more important to think about saving Avatar No. 1 than dealing with the negative effects of manipulating it in the short term. First, let's rule out Adam and Hermes. I can't even contact them with my primary and secondary avatars, let alone ask them for help. And it's too risky to let unfamiliar people conduct psychological therapy. So, only 008, then. Although its main ability is scriptwriting, judging from the original plot, 008's scriptwriting obviously can directly affect people's mental state. It should be able to work as a makeshift therapist. And with the ability of Inspectator, as long as it's psychological therapy, it doesn't matter which avatar I use, it should be effective. After all, fundamentally, I am the same consciousness in two bodies. Lynn pondered above the monster's corpse. So the only question is how to get 008. Lynn didn't understand the time and space where the secondary avatar was, so he didn't consider it for now. But based on the previous Lynn Sotos, Memories. Lynn knew that his main avatar was in the early morning of September 8, 1349. This meant that the plot of the first volume of Lord of Mysteries was approaching its end. Klein had already become the Sequence 8 clown and had experienced many scripts written by 008, as well as several battles and the death of Old Neil, gaining enough growth. The plot involving Ince and 008 was nearing its conclusion, and tomorrow, Megos would take the semi-mature True Creator offspring to the Tingen Nightwatcher branch. If I want to get 008, reporting it first won't work. If I report it, Ince might just run away with 008 and might even trigger the explosion of the True Creator's offspring early to cause chaos before leaving. Or maybe just launch it in advance. Anyway, the True Creator offspring are already mature. And even if Ince is really dealt with by the authorities, 008 won't end up in my hands. Lynn continued to ponder in his heart. I don't have the intelligence to set up any elaborate traps or schemes within schemes. It seems that the best way for me is to directly take a steam train to Tingen now and lay an ambush near Blackthorn Security Company. Then wait for Ince to act, directly find Ince and 008, and violently seize them. With the help of Avatar No. 1's power, this is achievable, and the cost should still be within my range of tolerance. Lynn was almost certain that, in order to obtain the main material for promotion to Sequence 4 and take it away first, Ince would definitely appear near the Tingen Nighthawks branch tomorrow. And because the fruit of victory was within sight, at this time, even if Ince noticed some clues, it was highly probable that he wouldn't leave and escape. After all, people are greedy and have a sense of luck. Ads by PubFuture. This was his chance. As long as I act fast enough, not only can I kill Ince and get 008, but I can also save Dunsmith and the others, and everyone will be happy. Lynn made up his mind. It might be shameful to hide in the bushes, but if it worked, it was useful. Ince wouldn't think that after he got what he came here for, there was still a hunter after his good fortune. As for Dunsmith and the others, Lynn's attitude was simple. If he could save them, he would. If not, there was nothing he could do. Lynn was never overly kind, and in some ways, he didn't really care about good and evil. It's just that some people hoped he would stand in the light, so Lynn restrained himself like that. But he wouldn't hold himself to the standard of a savior. Lynn knew he had no obligation and couldn't save everyone. So, Lynn only did what he could and sought to be free from guilt. If I can successfully get 008, the only thing I need to worry about is the Evernight Goddess and Adam. Thinking of the Evernight Goddess, who was the best player in the original work, and Adam, who almost calculated everything and never lost until the end, Lynn instinctively frowned. He naturally didn't think he had the ability to compete with them head-on now. Apart from the gap in strength, just talking about intellect, Lynn didn't think he could match them. Lynn was self-aware. Although he wasn't stupid, he was only slightly above the average intelligence of an ordinary person. Back then, he was able to go undercover in a distillery relying on his excellent professional skills and living in a lab resulting in his twisted upbringing. When it came to conspiracies and tricks, he was zero match for these old conspirators. But giving up for fear of choking isn't my style. For the current Evernight Goddess, the most important thing is still Klein. As long as I show my support for Klein and form a solid alliance with the Fool, there shouldn't be a problem on this end. And as for Adam, who always bets on both sides, as long as I give him 008 later, he might not do anything to me. Lynn sighed. The most important thing is still to improve my own strength. Otherwise, even without them taking action, I might be directly involved in some big conspiracy and disappear. Although I don't care much about my life, if I were to disappear like that, it would be too ridiculous. Ads by PubFuture. He could die, but even if he did, it had to be in a spectacular way. Meaningless death was the most unacceptable thing for Lynn. Lynn made up his mind. Just then, he saw from the corner of his eye that the red-haired boy seemed to have finished his thoughts. Lynn thought for a moment, intending to greet the boy, but saw him walk up to him and arrogantly say, "Come on, call me Big Brother." Lynn, what's going on? According to the birth order, shouldn't he be calling him Big Brother? What's up with this little brat? Seeing Lynn not respond, the red-haired boy raised his eyebrows and suddenly reached out to grab Lynn's face, pulling it unexpectedly. At the same time, he looked disgusted and said, "You turned out to be a fool. I will just throw you out, to save space here." After speaking, he really wanted to pick up Lynn and throw him out. Lynn, damn brat, where's my knife? Of course, Lynn wouldn't actually let his avatar be thrown out. He was caught off guard just now. The next second, he quickly slapped the red-haired boy's hand away, and with such force, the boy's hand swelled up immediately. But the red-haired boy, who had his hand turned red, obviously wasn't one to suffer, and immediately fought back after being hit. So a few seconds later, the two children were wrestling with each other, perhaps out of tacit understanding, or perhaps because they didn't expect it. Neither of them used any extraordinary abilities. About half a minute later, the red-haired boy was firmly pressed to the ground, half of his face buried in the flesh pile, while Lynn was suppressing him, smiling and saying, "Come on, good boy, call me big brother instead." Understanding the weight of the eldest brother's love, huh? End of chapter. I spit on you. Although his speech was slurred, the meaning the red-haired boy wanted to convey was very clear. Hey, Lynn chuckled, not getting angry. His gaze shifted downward to the boy's bare bottom. Yes, neither Lynn nor the red-haired boy had put on any clothes yet. Given that they both looked about 7 or 8 years old and there was no one else around, Lynn didn't feel embarrassed. At this moment, feeling provoked by the boy, Lynn looked at the boy's bare bottom and showed a mischievous smile, then raised his hand. Smack! Smack! 2 slaps landed on the boy's buttocks, just hard enough for a mythical creature's child but too heavy for an ordinary child. If it were an ordinary child, they might have cried out by now. But the boy was clearly not an ordinary child. He didn't even blink and instead showed a disdainful expression towards Lynn. Is that all? His tone was provocative, carrying a mocking flavor, looking very punchable. Lynn raised an eyebrow at his words. He wasn't really planning to argue with a child. The slaps were just a symbolic punishment. But faced with such provocation, Lynn did feel the urge to make the boy cry. No, Lynn, you can't really hold a grudge against a child. Lynn reminded himself inwardly, then took a deep breath and smiled. Yes, that's all. Then he slapped the boy's butt 10 more times, each slap heavier than the last. He really did hold a grudge. After all, a brat needed to be disciplined. After finishing, Lynn looked at the red-haired boy, who was now silent but clearly upset and not as unfazed as before. Lynn felt a sense of satisfaction. However, Lynn also checked the boy's buttocks and, seeing that they were only slightly red without any swelling, he was relieved. Indeed, mythical creatures had tough skin. With that thought, Lynn released the red-haired boy and smiled. If you're really not convinced, you can come back and beat me up when you have the ability. Ads by PubFuture. But for now, call me brother. HMPH. The red-haired boy snorted, got up from the ground, glanced at Lynn, and actually called out. Brother. Though his tone was quite unfriendly, it was clearly not perfunctory. Originally saying that as a joke, Lynn was taken aback. He glanced at the boy beside him and suddenly realized something. The boy was a naturally born mythical creature. Unlike normal children, survival of the fittest was a rule ingrained in the bones of mythical creatures. The initial provocation, the subsequent fight, and even the final taunt were deliberate. Although it might seem strange compared to normal thinking, he was actually testing Lynn's strength, confirming whether Lynn was qualified to live as his brother, and assessing his safety and danger. If Lynn had shown weakness or had murderous intent due to the boy's provocation, the outcome would have been vastly different. However, having passed the boy's test, the proud mythical creature child lowered his head and acknowledged Lynn's status. This really is. Lynn didn't know what to think for a moment. He finally felt the reality of not being in a civilized society. Looking at the red-haired boy, he finally sighed and said, well, no matter what, in light of you calling me brother, I'll take care of you in the future. After all, he was his brother in this world and a genuine child. As long as it was within his capability, Lynn couldn't just leave him. That would go against his principles. Hey, who's taking care of whom is still uncertain. The boy pouted, still sounding provocative. All right, it seems the test was real, but so was the provocation. Lynn glanced at him but said nothing more. He then surveyed the surroundings. They were currently in a man-made cave, which seemed to have been damaged. Lynn saw many broken pieces of furniture, with only a few intact items in the corners. However, before the damage, the place was well decorated, even resembling a palace. Ads by PubFuture. Lynn stopped examining the surroundings and then checked his own state. Confirming that there was still a long time before any significant divine corruption would appear, Lynn made a decision. He wanted to test his Beyonder abilities. Like every naturally born mythical creature, Lynn's Smurf Account No. 1 also had knowledge about the Sage sequence. After absorbing this knowledge, Lynn eagerly pondered for a moment, and his body began to become visibly illusory. Lynn suddenly felt as if he had fallen into a data stream of information, with his being disintegrating into various pieces of extensive knowledge. Everything around him lost its sense of reality, reduced to the most fundamental forms of information. To be honest, in this state, if one's will was not strong, it would be easy to get confused or lose oneself due to the external information bombardment. However, Lynn felt inexplicably comfortable, stabilizing himself effortlessly despite having no reliable anchor. Is this a benefit of transmigration or a characteristic of a naturally born mythical creature? As Lynn pondered this, he looked down at the monster's corpse beneath him. The once terrifying monster now appeared as a stream of clear information. Lynn suddenly understood why his avatar was a sage of the mystery prior pathway, while his brother was seemingly from the hunter pathway. His mother, who was both a hunter and a mystery prior, hadn't planned on having him originally. The mother's only intended child was his brother, and the reason for having the red-haired boy was simple: to expel the hunter characteristic from her body and wake from madness. Lynn's avatar had merely inherited the characteristic left behind after the mother's death. With a wry smile, Lynn looked at the red-haired boy beside him. At this moment, the boy appeared as a stream of information in his eyes as well, more tightly knit and dangerous than the ordinary information around him. Thinking for a moment, Lynn suddenly reached out towards the boy. The boy reacted swiftly, retreating several steps while snapping. "Don't use your ability on me." "Sorry." Lynn blinked, instantly recondensing his form, while his left index finger twitched. Although the boy had reacted quickly, Lynn's fingertips still caught some knowledge. So, while apologizing, Lynn was also reading the information. He then looked at the boy with a peculiar expression. "Hey, what's with that strange look?" The red-haired boy noticed Lynn's gaze and asked irritably. Lynn didn't answer because at that moment, his mind was processing two pieces of newly parsed information. Name: Medici. Pathway: Sequence 2 Weather Warlock. End of chapter. It's no exaggeration to say that at that moment, countless thoughts flashed through Lynn's mind, but ultimately they all condensed into 2 sentences. "Damn, so it's you, kid. No wonder you're so infuriating even as a child." Medici, also known as Little Red, nicknamed 3-in-1 Hotpot, was a famous comedic character in the original story. He was once the Red Angel who followed the ancient sun god, the king of angels of the Red Priest pathway. Later, in the 4th epic, he was betrayed by Alista Tutor, Amon, and Adam, becoming one of the materials for Blood Emperor Alista Tutor's Sequence 0 potion along with Sauron and Einhorn. This is also the source of the Hotpot joke. In the original work, Medici appeared as a 3-in-1 evil spirit, and due to his tragic yet strong background and humorous antics, he was quite popular among readers. "I actually became Medici's brother, huh?" For a moment, Lynn felt complicated emotions. He looked at the small figure, who, despite his young age, already showed signs of a future master of sarcasm. Lynn patted Medici's shoulder with a serious expression and said, "Kid, promise me, from now on, cultivate yourself and learn the art of language, okay? Otherwise, I fear you'll end up being turned into Hotpot." "What's wrong with you?" Medici was utterly baffled. "Nothing. Come on, get dressed." Lynn certainly couldn't tell Medici, "I've read the book and know you'll end up being cooked in a pot." He just smiled and changed the subject. At the same time, he raised his hand, and with a thought, a semi-transparent pen appeared in his hand. Lynn used the pen to draw on Medici, and star-like sparkles fell from his actions. Within seconds, a white robe appeared on Medici. Mystical reenactment. The magic pen of Ma Liang. It actually worked. Lynn raised an eyebrow. He was tentatively using his extraordinary ability to recreate the story of the magic pen of Ma Liang, and it surprisingly succeeded. Although the recreated magic pen couldn't draw everything, it could at least create common items. These drawn objects were essentially restructured information from other things but worked the same and could last a long time without disappearing. Ads by PubFuture. For other mythical creatures, this might be a useless ability, but for Lynn at this moment, it was incredibly helpful. At least he could draw 2 sets of clothes. After all, Being naked in this cave was one thing since there were no outsiders, but Lynn couldn't explore the outside world without clothes. He had his pride. After perfecting the details of Medici's clothing, Lynn quickly drew himself a set. Without causing any disturbance, he began to familiarize himself with his other abilities while thinking deeply. Upon learning Medici's identity, Lynn realized that his Smurf account existed in the mid-second epoch. To be honest, this was not a good era. It could be summarized in one sentence: demigods are as common as dogs, and angels walk the earth. In other eras, a Sequence 2 might be able to live with dignity, even enjoy being a top boss briefly in the 5th epoch when no true gods emerged. But in the 2nd epoch, the status of a Sequence 2 was quite awkward. Because this era belonged to the ancient gods, angels compared to the ancient gods were like Azek getting severely injured from just a glance from the Blood Emperor. They were not entirely powerless but not much different from ants. And the most crucial part was that most ancient gods in this era were mad due to mixing non-adjacent pathway characteristics. This meant that in other eras, if you encountered an unbeatable true god, you could still try reasoning or trading with them. Generally, unless you were an enemy, a Sequence 0 wouldn't randomly kill a Sequence 2. If all else failed, you could join them. As long as you didn't court death, most Sequence 2s could live well. But in this era, encountering a mad ancient god meant you couldn't expect to reason with a lunatic. These ancient gods could go crazy and even kill their descendants. This was why Medici didn't use extraordinary abilities during his test with Lynn. As two mythical creature children, they might be high and mighty to mortals, but if they caused a commotion and attracted an ancient god or a Sequence 1, they'd be free extraordinary characteristics for the taking. Moreover, a weather warlock wouldn't necessarily win in close combat against a sage, nor would using extraordinary abilities help much. Such a deadly era, and I can't even lie low. I have to spread faith to stabilize my humanity. Lynn rubbed his temples, feeling a genuine headache. He then glanced at Medici, forming a plan in his mind. Indeed, I should seek refuge with the ancient sun god once I get the 008. Although theoretically, it's a ship destined to sink, it's a grand ship until then. If I go now, at least I can secure a founding elder status and maybe coast to godhood. Meanwhile, in the same era, in a corner of the eastern continent. Ads by PubFuture. The ancient sun god looked in a certain direction, frowning slightly. After a moment of contemplation, he relaxed and smiled. Lord Ouroboros, who was painting murals to spread the faith, noticed and asked curiously. I saw something interesting. The ancient sun god turned back, smiling warmly at Ouroboros. Oh, Ouroboros nodded and continued painting without asking more. Seeing Ouroboros' disinterested attitude, the ancient sun god sighed helplessly. Ouroboros, a bit of curiosity isn't a bad thing. Is it a good thing? Ouroboros paused and looked at the ancient sun god, his expression unchanged but with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Perhaps it is. The ancient sun god replied uncertainly, with a hint of humor. You're not sure either. Ouroboros seemed surprised. Fate is not within my domain. The ancient sun god shook his head, smiling at Ouroboros. Perhaps you'll see more clearly in the future. I'm only a Sequence 2, Ouroboros stated. You won't always be, the ancient sun god said, smiling warmly as if stating a fact. After familiarizing himself with his abilities and ensuring there was no danger nearby, Lynn switched from his Smurf account back to his main account before reaching the limit. Shaking his head to dispel a slight sense of unease, Lynn stretched his body and suddenly froze. My mystery prior potion is fully digested. Previous Lynn Sotos had no knowledge of the acting method. Despite his inherent desire for knowledge that facilitated the digestion of the potion, when Lynn had taken over this body, the mystery prior potion was only halfway digested. End of this chapter. Mystical reenactment. The Magic Pen of Ma Liang. It originates from a Chinese story where this magic pen is Ma Liang's most powerful item, capable of turning anything drawn by it into reality. This includes weather, environments, animals, items, food, and so on. Could it be because when I logged into my Smurf account, I peered into the flow of information from the spiritual realm and glimpsed many hidden secrets? Lynn pondered, realizing this was the only explanation for his sudden digestion of the mystery prior potion in just 1 second. Would this be considered cheating? Lynn's expression turned somewhat subtle, but his mood was quite good. Now that the mystery prior potion had been digested, he could start preparing for his promotion to melee scholar. As for the potion formula, the original owner didn't have it, but as a sage, Lynn had long ago analyzed his own information and naturally obtained the relevant potion formulas from the mystery prior pathway. Although many ingredients in the analyzed formulas were in ancient terms, Lynn didn't see it as a major issue. With the cheat enabled, digesting the potion on my main account shouldn't be a problem, but for the Smurf account, Lynn couldn't help but contemplate, how should a sage role be played? A sage either refers to a big shot who has achieved high accomplishments in a certain field, or a person of high virtue and talent. Combining with the mysticism represented by the mystery prior pathway, am I supposed to play the role of a big shot in the mysticism field? Imagining himself in that role, Lynn couldn't help but burst into laughter. As he laughed, he thought of a certain extraordinary individual who was constantly chasing after the mystery prior pathway for intensive teaching, exhibiting a unique dedication to learning to the point of becoming eccentric, which made his expression even more peculiar. Could it be that Hidden Sage is actually playing the role of a sage? No, he should have surpassed this stage. Shaking his head, Lynn suppressed these random thoughts and looked towards the unconscious mobster not far away. Once he dealt with this guy, he would buy a ticket to Tingen. So, after spending some time handling the scene and ensuring he wouldn't end up behind bars, Lynn used the resources at hand to make a simple disguise and quietly left the desolate jungle, returning to the bustling city. However, despite having decided to head to Tingen immediately, Lynn didn't rush to buy a train ticket. Instead, he discreetly slipped into the safe house that previous Lynn Sotos had long prepared but never used, took the savings there, bought himself a steam train ticket to Tingen, and then, in the name of Lynn Sotos, wrote a report to the Evernight Church, reporting the incident involving the Tyranny von Helmasuen's manuscript. Ads by PubFuture. In the letter, Lynn recounted the original owner's experiences and discoveries with an extremely frightened tone, omitting the fact of the original owner's death, using vague expressions like, "They wanted to kill me, but I'm still alive," to obscure the truth, and ending with, "I'm very scared now and want to hide for a while until things settle down." For those who had caused the original owner's death, Lynn naturally had no intention of letting them off the hook. After all, repaying kindness with gratitude was a basic virtue. Since previous Lynn Sotos had given him his body, he naturally had to repay him in some small way. Anyway, whether it was the Mafia, Rosago, or Ambassador from Intis, none of them were good people. Killing any of them would be considered eliminating harm and would not violate the principles he had set for himself. However, reporting was only the first step. Lynn didn't expect to be able to deal with these people by simply reporting them. His real action would have to wait until he finished his business in Tingen and came back. But my mind is actually a blank slate now. Sitting on a bench in the waiting area, Lynn looked at the people coming and going at the station, unable to help but smile. Before switching back to his main account, Lynn had hypnotized himself to temporarily forget about anything related to 008, only remembering what he needed to do, until the time was right to remember. This was the best precaution against 008. As Lynn arrived on the steam train to Loen, on the outskirts of Loen, in a house with a verdant lawn, an ordinary-looking notebook lay open behind the window of the bedroom. A breeze blew in through the window, rustling the pages, and in the sound of the paper, rows of heart-pounding words faintly appeared. Due to fatigue and the dual effects of hallucinations, Hannes Vincent, citizen of Tingen City, mistakenly sold the Antigonus family's notebook as an ordinary ancient book, which is a logical coincidence. What is puzzling is that, lacking sufficient reasons, Klein did not commit suicide afterwards but successfully survived. Through Welch McGovern's case, he met Dunn Smith and joined the Nighthawks team. Ads by PubFuture. Madame Sharon, in order to completely polarize the conservative and new parties in Tingen City, and to vent the accumulated madness little by little after transforming her body, decided to take the risk of killing MP John Maynard. Madame Sharon has been dealt with, Kenley White has also died, and Dunn feels very guilty. According to tradition, he consumed the extraordinary characteristics left by the other party. His digestion process was thus interrupted, and his mental state became quite unstable. The contents of the notebook abruptly stopped here, with the subsequent pages all blank. Apparently the owner of the notebook had not yet written an ending to this story. Unlike Backland, where the 9 o'clock sun is always shining brightly, there is no haze to be seen. Lynn stepped out of the station with his suitcase. Instead of immediately heading to the Evernight church near the Bacarland party, he first rented a room and quickly procured a batch of materials. Then, alone in his room, Lynn began to disguise himself in front of the mirror. Although the lack of certain materials due to the differences in the worlds posed a challenge, it didn't hinder Lynn from making full use of the advanced disguising skills he had obtained from the Witch of 1,000 Faces. He skillfully applied some substances to his face, completely changing the facial features from one style of handsome guy to another. Next, Lynn put on a black wig, completely covering his shoulder-length golden curls, and inserted something into his shoes to change his height and gait. By the time Lynn was done, the person in the mirror no longer bore any resemblance to Lynn Soto's, except for those pair of grayish eyes. "It's a pity I don't have colored contact lenses, it's not perfect after all." Lynn shook his head, but didn't pay too much attention. Although the eye color couldn't be changed, Lynn had altered the eye shape using eyeliner and shading techniques. Now he looked nothing like his original self, to the point where even his own mother wouldn't recognize him. Of course, cheating with Beyonder abilities would be a different story. After all, ordinary people couldn't beat a cheater. And the reason Lynn changed his appearance, apart from preparing for the upcoming actions, was to manually create a scapegoat. Disguising to this extent in appearance should be enough, although this world has divination and other supernatural abilities. Lynn looked at himself in the mirror, appearing refined and mysterious, and silently pondered, but a sage's status should be enough to disrupt them. However, Lynn smiled at himself in the mirror. "I think it's better to experiment beforehand before taking action." End of chapter. Lynn needed to understand the side effects of borrowing abilities and how these borrowed abilities would manifest. Although experimenting in advance was risky, it was better than being unprepared and panicking when the time came. With this in mind, Lynn closed his eyes. Half of his consciousness returned to his first Smurf account, beginning to channel its power into his main body based on the information he had obtained. It might have been a minute, or perhaps just a few seconds, before Lynn reopened his eyes. Now, his usually gray eyes were pure silver. This feeling, tisk, Lynn observed his own state. He felt both detached and fused with the world, as if separated by frosted glass but still able to see clearly. This was a completely different sensation from when he controlled the Smurf account. He could distinctly feel himself being corrupted by divinity. However, this divinity did not bring chaos or madness but placed him in an indescribable state of absolute rationality. He looked at the world as if viewing a painting. No matter what the scene depicted, nothing could stir his interest. Lynn suddenly felt as if he had returned to years ago when he was undergoing psychological therapy. Occasionally, looking out the window, he would have similar thoughts. If the painting is destroyed, can't it just be redrawn? Lynn almost unconsciously murmured, almost like talking in his sleep, before suddenly snapping back to awareness. The silver in his eyes faded away completely. Phew, phew. Lynn let out a long breath, realizing he had underestimated the power of divinity and had almost been ensnared again. He had painstakingly rid himself of such strange mindsets back then and did not want to revert to them. Still, this experience has been beneficial. Lynn wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, looking at his reflection. The information he received during the borrowing allowed him to understand that, even after exiting the borrowing state, he still retained the influence of a high-level persona. This high-level aura couldn't give Lynn Beyonder abilities directly, but it could interfere with others' divinations and perceptions, potentially making them mistake him for a high-sequence big shot. Lynn suddenly had an idea. He wanted to visit the St. Selena Cathedral. St. Selena Cathedral was the only cathedral of the Evernight Church in Tingen City, named after the departed St. Selena of the Evernight Church. Her ashes, containing extraordinary properties, were stored a few streets away in the Nighthawks underground area, disguised as a security company. Even in death, St. Selena's ashes suppressed the restless sealed artifacts behind the Chinese gate. St. Selena's ashes were also the target of Ince Zangwill, who wrote a series of scripts using 008, leading to the Tingen incident. This is what it feels like to see words become reality. I've never seen such a large cathedral. Lynn stood a short distance from the St. Selena Cathedral, openly admiring this obviously well-funded and well-attended church, and couldn't help but smile. However, he quickly recalled something and muttered silently, although, I've never truly set foot in what's called reality, either. Before his transmigration, he had never left that underground base. His first contact with the outside world and reality was in the world of Detective Conan after his transmigration. But Lynn didn't care much about it. He never missed the cage that had confined him his entire life. Since he was already here, he decided to enter the cathedral, light a candle, and pay respects to the deity. As mentioned earlier, the cathedral was not empty. Although not crowded, it clearly demonstrated the prevalence of the Evernight faith in the Tingen city. However, the hall was quiet, most believers sitting silently and praying, with a few queuing at the confessionals. Lynn had no intention of confessing. He sat in the hall for a while, listening to nearby prayers, before approaching the offering box, taking out £50, and donating it according to his usual practice when visiting temples and monasteries. This act also served to show some presence and goodwill to the Evernight Church. When reviewing the situation later, they might notice that the troublemaker had shown up before and even made a donation, which could be seen as a gesture of goodwill. Given his high-level aura, no one could divine anything about him. Moreover, Lynn glanced at the black moon emblem on the wall, then lowered his head with a seemingly pious gesture, making the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Lynn was very curious if his presence would be noticed by the Evernight goddess. Was the past of his first Smurf account a real past or a parallel timeline? If it was the former, would there be a temporal paradox, and would the Evernight goddess recognize him? The priest beside the offering box, unaware of Lynn's inner musings, watched Lynn place £50 into the box and immediately softened his gaze. £50 was no small amount. Excluding special donations from wealthy patrons, £50 was often the largest donation the church's offering box received, especially in a small city like Tingen. Such donations were rare, usually coming from the rich and truly wealthy. But this one looked unfamiliar. Was he a wealthy man new to Tingen, planning to develop here? The priest speculated while giving Lynn a warm smile, mentally noting his appearance. Not with the intention to curry favor, but as the priest of St. Selena Cathedral, he needed to have a basic understanding of Tingen's wealthy, as the church inevitably interacted with these people. Lynn returned the priest's smile, then turned to leave the cathedral, planning to find a good hotel nearby to stay. However, he hadn't gone far when his gaze paused on a nearby person who seemed somewhat downcast. The man was a very handsome young man with black hair and gemstone-like green eyes, wearing tight pants suitable for movement, though his white shirt was untucked. Clearly, this was not someone with a strict lifestyle, but perhaps due to his looks, this slightly disheveled style didn't make him look sloppy but rather gave him a distinct romantic aura of a poet. Leonard Mitchell, an important character in Lordofthemysteries, entering with an old grandpa plug-in, known as the true protagonist, certified by the author, handsome, and a close friend of Klein. He was also the future star of the Tarot Club. End of chapter. In almost an instant, Lynn confirmed the other person's identity. With such distinct features, it was hard for anyone not to recognize him. Why is he here? Let me think. The current plot should involve the Madame Sharon witch incident. In this event, it seems that a Nighthawk named Kenley White was sacrificed. Lynn quickly reviewed the plot in his mind and made a guess. Leonard is here because he feels sorrowful over Kenley's sacrifice, seeking some spiritual peace in the church. With this thought, Lynn looked at the melancholic Leonard without hiding his gaze. After all, with Leonard's appearance, it was normal for people to look at him a few more times. Moreover, Lynn was here to make his presence known. If Leonard noticed him because of this, it would actually be a good thing for Lynn. Leonard naturally noticed his unabashed gaze. However, due to the recent deaths of old Neil and Kenley, he wasn't in the mood to care about the usual stares he had long gotten used to. But then, Leonard suddenly heard the old man who lived in his head, from an unknown origin, murmur, "Hem." This startled Leonard, pulling him out of his sorrow. He looked up vigilantly and saw a young gentleman smiling and looking at him from a distance. What's going on? Who is this? Leonard was puzzled but didn't want to ask the old man in front of this stranger. He forced a smile and asked, "Sir, can I help you with something?" Leonard wasn't too afraid. After all, this was inside the St. Selena Church, under the watchful eyes of the goddess. He didn't think any heretic would dare to cause trouble here. "I just found it interesting." Lynn smiled, and his deep voice was as pleasant as a cello. Leonard restrained the urge to rub his eyes. Interesting. Leonard frowned, thinking the man in front of him must be crazy. Lynn didn't explain, only gave a cryptic smile and then asked a question that seemed nonsensical to Leonard. Do you like monocles? Ads by PubFuture. What? Leonard was completely confused, but after thinking for a moment, he answered, not really, I don't like wearing glasses. That's good. I don't like them either. Lynn smiled meaningfully, then seemed to lose interest in the conversation and walked past Leonard out of the church. Watching Lynn's back, Leonard really felt like he had encountered a madman. But after some hesitation, he didn't chase after him. Only after the figure had left did Leonard lower his voice and ask, is there something wrong with him? Perhaps you should ask him for help, replied the voice in Leonard's mind, Pallas Zoroast. The entity residing in Leonard was also watching Lynn leave with some suspicion. At the moment when Lynn had been observing Pallas, the latter had felt a chilling sensation, as if his past and future were being scrutinized. But when Pallas focused his attention on Lynn, that feeling seemed to be just an illusion. But that was impossible. Pallas had indeed sensed a high-ranking presence from Lynn. As a Marauder Pathway angel who had managed to escape from Amon and survive until now, Pallas never ignored any subtle detail. Especially since Lynn's words seemed to openly reveal that he had seen through Pallas's disguise. Lynn definitely discovered Pallas's parasitism and recognized his identity. But who was this? Pallas went through his mental list of old friends and found none who matched Lynn's profile. Could it be a newly ascended angel? Or a manifestation of an old friend? Pallas pondered, without any intention to flee. Firstly, it was inconvenient, and secondly, he hadn't sensed any malice from Lynn. It seemed Lynn was simply there to make an appearance or perhaps to express goodwill. What? Him? You can't be serious, old man. How could that be possible? Leonard was in shock, not yet aware that Pallas was an angel. His understanding of the strongest extraordinary beings extended only to Sequence 5, the goddess's sword. He never imagined he'd encounter an angel. Especially not in the Church of the Goddess. Ads by PubFuture. That couldn't be. Wait, the Church of the Goddess. Leonard suddenly had a thought. He almost instinctively glanced at the holy emblem of the Evernight goddess on the wall, considering another possibility. Could that angel be one of ours? Leonard truly couldn't believe that an angel from some hidden organization would dare to wander around the Church of the Goddess. Even if they weren't from his side, they shouldn't be hostile, right? Playing cool and then running away, thrilling. In the temporary rented house, Lynn savored what he had just done and couldn't help but laugh. Though the Evernight goddess hadn't reacted to his appearance, which disappointed him a bit, it felt good to act cool in front of Leonard and the old man. But it seems the old man doesn't recognize me. Could it really be a parallel timeline? Lynn pondered as he switched part of his consciousness back to his Smurf account. He needed to make the final preparations for his next move. You want my blood? In the artificially dug cave, Medici looked at Lynn with narrowed eyes. Have you gone mad? Slept too much and lost your mind? I'm not mad. My pathway requires analyzing the blood of other mythical creatures to gain enough information to create corresponding magic, Lynn explained confidently. So for the sake of increasing our chances of survival in this dangerous world, kid, contribute your share. Of course, if you let me read your information once, I won't need your blood. As a representative of the Mystery Prior Pathway, its abilities were mostly related to knowledge and secrets. Even the Sequence 2 sage was no exception. Analyzing the information of other mythical creatures and then creating corresponding magic was one of the sage's abilities. The more complete the information read, the closer the created magic would be to the original. So for Lynn, reading Medici's blood was already a compromise. The best result would be to read Medici entirely, copying and pasting everything. End of chapter. However, Lynn knew that was wishful thinking. No normal person would let their information flow freely for others to read. Not to mention the danger of such behavior, even from a privacy perspective, few people would willingly let themselves be read through. The main reason Lynn wanted to analyze Medici's blood was to prepare for the upcoming Tingen operation. The Mystery Prior Pathway at Sequence 4 doesn't have many direct offensive methods, so Lynn needed to create some magic that could effectively deal with ints, without being too high level, to serve as his means of attack. The Hunter Pathway's abilities were clearly very suitable. Lynn, are you never clear-headed? Medici said sarcastically, implying, you're dreaming. The reason Medici said Lynn wasn't clear-headed was that, to avoid making his Smurf account seem too inactive, Lynn chose to cover up by sleeping. The time flow between the two spaces wasn't the same. While Lynn sat on a steam train here, several days had already passed in the second epoch there. Lynn had tried comparing the time flow between the two, but it wasn't consistent. Sometimes, 10 minutes in the fifth epoch equaled a whole day in the second epoch, while other times, the time flow was almost the same in both. Logically, running two accounts simultaneously under such conditions should have made Lynn feel very disoriented. But perhaps because he was already used to the strange timelines in the Conan world, Lynn adapted very well. "Don't you want to explore the outside world?" Lynn skillfully ignored Medici's sarcasm and said with a charming smile, "Don't think I don't know. You've been secretly familiarizing yourself with your abilities all this time. You've long been eager to leave this safe nest and go outside, to participate in those wars, right?" Medici raised an eyebrow at his words but didn't deny it. As an angelic mythical creature of the Red Priest pathway symbolizing war, the desire for war was Medici's innate instinct. Lynn continued unhurriedly, "But this world is so dangerous. Even as a weather warlock, if you rashly join those wars with deities behind them, you risk being crushed to death. But with me, it's different. I'll be your best helper. 1 + 1 might not be greater than 2, but it's definitely greater than 1. At the very least, having an extra person can help share the risks." Ads by PubFuture. Looking at Medici, Lynn's smile was tempting. "So, helping me get stronger is helping yourself, Medici." Medici fell silent. Newly born for less than a month and still mentally immature, he was obviously trapped by Lynn's logic. After all, Lynn's words were reasonable to some extent. Finally, he nodded and said, "You can have my blood, but nothing else." "Ah, children are indeed easy to fool." Lynn, completely unashamed, replied without blushing, "Thanks, little brother." The next morning, for most people, it was an extremely ordinary day. It wasn't a significant festival, nor had anything major happened. No one knew that shadows full of scheming had already enveloped Tingen, waiting for a third-rate writer to write the final script, which would trigger everything. Meanwhile, Klein Moretti, who had been on duty at Channy's Gate for a day and was anxious about his captain, forcing himself to sleep through meditation, received a notification from Dunsmith in his dream. Leonard had found clues related to Lenevis, and since the new recruit supposed to report today hadn't arrived, Klein's help was needed. As for who Lenevis was, it was simple. On the surface, he was a fraudster of the Marauder pathway, but he was actually a core figure in Ince's Tingen's script, the nominal father of the soon-to-be-born evil god's offspring. Megos, pregnant with the evil god's child, was deceived by this scumbag and became the sacrifice in the evil ritual held by Lenevis and his accomplices, unknowingly carrying the child of the true creator. This naturally involved the manipulation of Ince and 008, as well as the true creator's tacit approval. The former aimed to use the evil god's offspring to annihilate the Nighthawks and deplete the power of Saint Selena's ashes to obtain the Beander characteristics he desired. The latter played a double game, seemingly sending down his offspring while planting his divinity in Lenevis, aiming to transform him into a divine vessel. Ads by PubFuture. From this perspective, the true creator wasn't fully stupid. Of course, Klein was unaware of these details at this point. He only saw Lenevis as a fraudster, at most suspecting his connection to the Aurora Order. Although he felt that recent events seemed to be brewing something significant, he quickly got ready and went to the house where the clues were found, meeting Leonard, who had been waiting for a while. Despite it being a chilly September, Leonard, with his excellent physical condition as a midnight poet, still wore a thin white shirt and beige trousers, without even a coat. "This is likely the house rented by Lenevis under an alias," Leonard explained to Klein as he arrived. Meanwhile, in a house just a street away from the Blackthorn Security Company, a slightly pale hand held an unremarkable notebook. The person turned to the last page, paused briefly, then lowered the end of a white feather pen and wrote at the end of the script. In this situation, Leonard and Klein discovered a letter left by Lenevis, which is a very reasonable and logical development. In the house at 62 Howell Street, Klein's divination finally led them to find a hidden compartment. To their surprise, inside was a letter left by Lenevis. A letter. Lenevis left a letter here. Klein was momentarily puzzled but quickly performed a divination to confirm the letter's safety. Leonard then swiftly opened the envelope and began reading its contents. "Ha ha ha, congratulations on finding this letter. This means you are not entirely stupid or slow," qualified to participate in the life and death game I designed. The letter began with Lenevis's mocking words, stating that he wanted to play a game with the official Beyonders. His arrogant words made Klein and Leonard, as official Beyonders, both puzzled and frowned. But after reading the letter's final content, both Klein and Leonard realized they might be in big trouble, as Lenevis claimed to have placed a bomb in Tingen that would blow up the entire city. Although Lenevis might be lying, Klein and Leonard decided to return to the Blackthorn Security Company immediately to report this to Captain Dunn. End of chapter. As Klein and Leonard returned to the Blackthorn Security Company to report Lenevis's letter to Captain Dunn, a white feather pen continues writing in a notebook inside a house just a street away. Megos, under a mysterious call, came to No. 36 Zudaland Street and entered the Blackthorn Security Company. The baby in her womb was at a critical stage, preventing her from controlling her impulses. Which is again, a very reasonable and logical development. Where is this? At the entrance of the Blackthorn Security Company, the melancholic and serene Megos stroked her belly, which appeared to be 7 or 8 months pregnant despite being only a few months along. Her green eyes looked ahead, slightly dazed. She didn't know why she suddenly felt compelled to come to Zudaland Street or why she wanted to visit this security company. She just acted on the sudden urge. Megos. Suddenly, Megos heard someone calling her name, bringing her back to reality. She realized there were now 2 people standing in front of her. One was the divination expert she had met before, and the other was a very handsome man. Instinctively, Megos stroked her belly again, noticing the 2 men standing frozen in place, silent for about 10 seconds. However, Megos didn't care. Her spirit, heavily eroded by the unborn evil god's child, left little in the world that mattered to her besides her baby. Opposite Megos, Klein, who had realized what was inside her, finally managed to shake off the fear brought by his spiritual intuition. Klein instantly understood what the bomb Lenevis mentioned in the letter really was. A primal fear enveloped Klein, making him instinctively reject this terrifying reality. But then, Klein gripped the flaring sun charm and the Azek's copper whistle in his pocket, using these high-level items to enter a semi-cogitative state, forcing himself to calm down and abandon any wishful thinking. He glanced at Leonard, who had also come to his senses, and the 2 of them tacitly led Megos inside. While Leonard comforted her, Klein quickly reached Dunn's office. Without knocking, he opened the door and walked in, closing it behind him. He looked at Dunn and said in a grave tone, "Ads by PubFuture. Captain, something big has happened." Dunn made detailed and correct arrangements, but he made one mistake. Unfortunately, Azek is in Backland, and not being a planeswalker, it's hard for him to return in such a short time. The white feather pen flew across the notebook, clearly preparing to bring Tingen's story to a close in one go. But just then, Ince Zangwill, who seemed to already see himself seizing victory, suddenly heard a song. Looking for a friend, found a good friend. Salute, shake hands, ah, I found you. It sounded like someone was humming a nursery rhyme. But as the song played, Ince suddenly found his surroundings changed. In an instant, he seemed to move from indoors to a dense forest, his feet on moist soil and small mounds, along with tombstones. In front of one tombstone, a young man with short black hair and ashen gray eyes materialized from transparency to solidity, like a ghost returning to the human world. Mystical reenactment. Hide and seek. Lynn had spent the night creating this new magic, the story's core being a seemingly earthly but actually quite eerie game of hide and seek. The effect of this ability was simple, finding someone. Although Lynn, lacking anything related to Ince and being interfered with by 008's nature, couldn't use this magic to locate him from afar, with such close proximity, despite taking some time, Lynn successfully used the magic hide and seek to find his good friend. And now, it was time for a beating. Ads by PubFuture. With that thought, Lynn smiled slightly at Ince and said, "Hello, Ince Zangwill, I really like the pen you're holding, so could you please part with it?" As Lynn spoke, scorching flames engulfed Ince Zangwill's position, the high temperature causing the air to tremble. "Of course, if you disagree, then you'll have to die." Inside the Blackthorn Security Company, after urgently evacuating the clerical staff and retrieving equipment from Shani's Gate, Klein and his companions engaged in a fierce battle with Megos and the unborn evil god's child in her womb. Megos no longer appeared as the melancholic and serene beauty she had been. Her golden hair had fallen out, and her skin secreted a liquid with a blasphemous odor, clearly mutated. If not for the three's unique advantages, one with a powerful grandpa as a backup, another wielding a flaring sun charm capable of countering evil, and Klein holding Saint Selena's ashes, they would have been wiped out by Megos. Even so, Klein and his companions had a near-death experience within seconds. Klein was nearly split in half by Megos, who had entered her second form, Bone Blade. Though he narrowly escaped with his life, he was gravely injured. This wasn't the end. Just after suffering from Klein's flaring sun charm, Megos teleported in front of him, raising a bone knife to finish him off. Leonard, his heart tightening, was about to use evil word to control Megos, but then a golden red flame spear silently appeared, its scorching aura brushing past Klein's hair, piercing Megos unexpectedly. She was sent flying, and the red-hot explosion filled Klein's vision. The flame spear had detonated inside Megos, severely injuring her and burning the evil god's child inside her. "Sorry, I'm a bit late." A gentle voice sounded in Klein's ear. He turned to see a stranger beside him, a young man in a beige coat with black hair and ashen-gray eyes, as handsome as Leonard. The young man's hand lightly pressed on Klein's wound, and with a warm white glow, Klein saw his chest wound healing. End of chapter. The lyrics, looking for a friend, found a good friend. Salute, shake hands, ah, I found you, are from a Chinese children's song called Jiao Peng Yu, which means, looking for a friend, in English.